Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. This podcast is designed for the adult medical speech-language pathologist. Most of our audience members work in settings such as acute care hospitals, private practice, outpatient hospital clinics, and inpatient rehabilitation hospitals. Each episode has an accompanying audio course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. The content of this course is based on the research and experience of the presenters. The listener is responsible for researching to determine if the information and skills taught are appropriate for their clients, students, or patients. SpeechTherapyPD.com does not necessarily endorse, recommend, or favor the information shared, nor any of the claims, opinions, statements, offers, or services made by the presenter.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Renee Garrett, and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Each episode is 60 minutes and will be offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. So here are the financial and non-financial disclosures. Jill Adlin receives an honorarium for her appearance on this podcast from SpeechTherapyPD.com. Jill has non-financial relationships. My disclosures are that I am a paid employee of a private consulting firm in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and as the host of this podcast and other webinars on SpeechTherapyPD.com, I receive financial compensation. My non-financial disclosure is that I'm the secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Questions can be written in the chat box or the Q&A and will be answered as received. And now, without further ado, we welcome our guest tonight, Jill Adlin, who is a licensed speech-language pathologist who served in a variety of settings, including home health, schools, nursing homes, and private clinics. Her passion for AAC started 14 years ago when she served children with complex needs at the Fort Sanders Education Development Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. Jill served as an SLP AAC specialist on AT teams in Tennessee and North Carolina before coming to Control Bionics. She has a particular interest in the issue of AAC abandonment. Jill is focused on working collaboratively with individuals who use AAC and their teams to ensure appropriate support of their communication device so that no device is left sitting on a shelf. If she's not with her clients, Jill is happiest with her dog and family on an adventure involving new places, food, and music. Welcome, Jill. So great to have you tonight.
Thank you. I forgot that we had a little bit about my dog in there because she is snoring beside me right now. If
I
you
love it.
That's who it is.
So let's start by, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit, because I love your sayings that you say, things about geeking out about AAC. And so can you kind of just give us a background on, I've mentioned in your bio how you got started, but like why this is such a passion thing for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, like many people, made bold proclamations about what I would and would not do as a clinician. I had at the time when I was in grad school at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, we had a really robust dysphagia program. So we had pediatric dysphagia and we had a lot going on and I loved it. I did 2 hospital rotations. I was in the NICU, actually helped with research about oxygen saturation levels during feeding with typically developing infants. And this was the area I was going to go. I was going to work on feeding and swallowing and animal-assisted therapy. And I was quite firm in that and would never work in the schools. That's the thing I knew. So I didn't initially. I worked in a private practice. I did a little bit in a nursing home I had a home health position where I was in hospitals. We just served a lot of rural hospitals and loved all of that. I really did. I had a really complex, diverse caseload, but we got a contract with early intervention. So I started to have more and more little people on my schedule. And then I had my own baby and I was home with her for a little time. And when I went back to work, I ended up going to the school system, head hung, shoulders low. I was not happy. And lo and behold, found out that truly, truly some of the brightest, most outside the box, creative, find solutions speech pathologists I ever would work with are in the school systems. And I think that is a misconception that was out there. But I had no AAC. I had only enough to get that competency checked off when I got out of grad school. I'm going to tell you, it was slim. And when I got to this specialized school, it's a school for kids with significant disabilities who typically are between the ages of 3 and 5. We had some autism demonstration classrooms that went up to 7 years of age. And then we had a medically fragile classroom that went up to 21. And almost everybody there needed augmentative communication. And I was like a deer in the headlights. So I had this chaotic journey of trial by fire. And on the weekends and at night and at any conference I could attend in person, I was just soaking up as much information as I could. And, you know, any time you've worked with AAC for me, and I did like situations that were much more complex. And to see that shift, that moment where somebody is able to let their thought be known, it's pretty powerful. I'm an adrenaline junkie of the original kind, but I'm going to tell you, I used to skydive and all of that. And having somebody, having somebody have success in that realm and be able to let me know what was happening with them, that's just a pure shot of adrenaline for me. So, I mean, I was sold right away. I loved it. And I will tell you, I found myself wishing the more I learned, that I kept wanting to go back to some of my home health clients that I felt like I had underserved because I didn't have enough information. And you don't know what you don't know. I've given up on beating up on myself. We'll say, and we may have already talked about this, Renee, I do think the older I get, the more experience I have, the less I know. The more I realize that there's just not a right answer. And I've got so much to learn. And I think being open-minded about that and that not being something that makes you scared to start or makes you scared to try, it's okay. It's, you know, it's all a process of like discovery and revelation. And how do we, we'll try this, evaluate it, see if it works and drop back and try again. You're not, do no harm if you can, but just try and learn. And I still learn. I learn the most from the people I serve. That's been my masterclass, truly. But, brilliant teams and even teams that don't feel like they know as much about AAC, it doesn't matter. Insight about the person and how to engage with them really is all you need to kind of start that journey. So I'm obsessed with it. I would talk about it. Well, I can tell you about an hour and a half past my husband's interest in it. It's one of those that I have to say, well, bring me in. I maybe have, you maybe asked me about the wrong thing.
I think it's really interesting too, that you're sort of, like you mentioned, your trial by fire was in the school system, and that now you tend to work more with medically complex clients that are not school aged. And so with, not having had, like I have the background in acute care and in IPR, I think it's interesting that, and I say that because a lot of people I know that I work with now in the consulting firm are more, they're kind of scared of the medically complex folks at first because they don't have the background of those diagnoses where you have to look holistically at the patient and sort of have this background medical knowledge. So how did you wind up like kind of making that transition?
That's a great question. And so there's a bit of that mixed in because of my medically fragile classroom. So the kids in that classroom went up to the age of 22. Each of them had their own nurse. They were very medically complex. I had 2 kids who had a mitochondrial disease. So we had very rare medically complex conditions there that gave me just a little taste of it. And in my current role, I'm really dependent on the staff there to tell me the details because I work for Control Bionics and because of the kind of equipment we use, I do tend to see very medically complex people. And so oftentimes, not always, but many times they have very rare disorders. I'll have a speech pathologist who says, I have a patient I need you to see. I've never heard of this diagnosis, but this is what it is. So, we're all kind of figuring it out, and there's a lot to consider in there. And all of that is really important. But here's something that I think is so key for really anything, but decidedly for AAC, like genuine interest in that person and a genuine desire to spend time with them and know what's going on with them. That's maybe more important than anything else. And then, I do need to know, what do we need to know about their vision, about their hearing? What I need to know about, any kind of medically implanted devices. Do we need to know anything about, risk for seizures? All of that's there. And I'm, confident there's especially a mom, dad, or spouse. They know that better than the doctor. They're going to let you know what we need to be cognizant of. I love that you said the whole patient. I think probably our crew speech pathologists maybe think in that realm a bit more, which is nice. But how do I look at the broader context of how this is impacting them and what might interfere with my ability to help them? I was intimidated at first because I had been with kids so much longer. The person who was in this position before me, brilliant, wonderful, lovely, Keely McMahon from Vanderbilt University, and she was at the Phi Beta Kappa program there. And she told me, I said, so I haven't worked with a lot of adults with ALS. It makes me a little concerned. And she said, oh no. She said, trust me, I had worked with almost exclusively adults with ALS. She said, it's the kids. The kids are hard. But she said, you can do the kids, you're fine with ALS, because we serve a broad range. My currently just appointments that I have within the next month or so, I have a little one who's not quite 3 yet. And then I have somebody who's 81 years old. So there's a really broad range. I think what tends to be the common thread is just complexity, just difficulty.
Yeah.
We have kids who use touchscreen devices. They just don't need much help from me. So I'm not necessarily there as often as I am with our more medically complex people. But I depend, as always, on the brilliant teams around these people because they're there. And that's the other thing. Don't be afraid of not knowing. I am absolutely somebody who will say, I have no idea what you just said. Tell me what that is, or write it down for me so I can go look it up and learn about it later. I am very comfortable with my own ignorance. So
and I think that's a great point, because I think I've said this before too on the podcast and on different webinars, that I worked with people who, like in acute care, for example, when the families came in or where the family was present, I'd get the warning, the family's in the room, and I'd be like, oh, that's good, because I would preface it by saying, I'm so glad you're here, because I feel like when you acknowledge them and make it a positive statement, then they're more apt to share with you, because I'll say something along the lines of, I'm so glad you're here because, so-and-so, Mr. Bob and I just met, but you've known him much longer and you have all this insight. So anything you can tell me that you think would be helpful, please don't hesitate to jump right in. And I think when you do that, it not only engages the caregiver, but I think it helps them have the sense of their importance, and they're important to you. And I think that's missing as having been a family member before I was a clinician, not feeling like we were seen as a family and as a caregiving entity. I think that's so, so important.
I love that. And I think that, yeah, because if you bypass the family, you've got this person in front of you who is medically complex. And there's so much more to them than that. One of my very favorite things is getting to work in people's homes so that I can see the walls full of pictures of their lives and everything that they've done and just know them outside of the medical challenges that they're facing right now. And that's what, I mean, the family, you get so stuck there. I'm with you. I have someone in my family who has a syndrome. And so I've been on both sides of the table. And in fact, today is her 21st birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Yes, happy birthday, Miss Adlin Elizabeth Sims, who is a spectacular human. But you know your person and you know the whole of them. And sometimes that seems to get lost when you meet professionals. So I love professional input, but I really love to hear the person who's going to tell me, oh, well, he's feeling sassy right now. And that's what that is. That's who I want to know, because that's more beneficial, I think, in the long run. At least
and spunky sassy goes a long way for communication training too. You know, you've got someone who's they got a lot to say and they can't necessarily verbally get it out. And so let's kind of jump right into the devices. So I know that Control Bionics I'm just going to say full disclaimer. I didn't know that Control Bionics was a thing until I met you, because I think, you know, most of us have this. I won't mention it doesn't really matter if I mention other brands or not. It's more or less the sort of mainstream devices that I've seen used across the settings that I've worked in. And that's I don't think that one device is better than another. I think it's the practicality or maybe the accessibility of the person who is demonstrating the devices and maybe the region. You know, there's a lot of prevalence for certain devices in certain regions, as you know. But thinking about the devices and what the access looks like, Control Bionics has a little bit different access device that other companies aren't necessarily using yet, different technology. So if you want to kind of run through the neuro node, that would be great.
Yes, I will.
I just love saying that out loud. It's so fun, neuro node.
What's really fun is what speech to text does with it on your phone. Yeah.
Oh,
I've had all kinds of interesting things happen there. I do want to just say, so you mentioned in the introduction, I was AAC specialist on assistive technology teams in a couple of states. And, you know, that my whole role was assistive technology. And it was still hard to know and stay on top of what was out there. I think, you know, I said, if I had all the money and skill, I'm actually not at all. That should have been your first disclaimer. I am not tech savvy. I am a Luddite. I tend to have a negative impact on technology. I'm here because if I can do it, swear to you, anybody can do it. It does not. I am not skilled in this realm. But it was hard to get my hands on devices and to know what was out there. And I said, I feel like we need a clearinghouse that is just an objective listing, like Amazon, of what's out there. You can click on it, you can read about the features, because it's so hard to know. It's hard to get good information. And I think I am a licensed speech pathologist whose focus is on AT, and it's still hard to know all of the things that are coming. And I will tell everybody, I'm an AAC evangelist. I really don't care what you use, just use something and find a way to stay on top of what's out there, because I personally just feel like it is, you know, it's hard to need a communication device, but if you were going to need one, this is a great era for it. I think the devices out there are amazing. Just in my career of focus in this area, that everything has advanced so much. And the other big players and some of the small ones, I think they're excellent. I really do. I think there are so many great choices out there. And I think there's lots more exciting things to come. So it's hard to know. And it really resonates with me that if I don't know that, then, you know, families and practitioners who just aren't in locations where they can easily get their hands on things. And like we said earlier, don't know what they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So that's why I'm a device evangelist. I will show you what I have, and then I will give you the names and phone numbers of people from other companies so you can look at their stuff too, because getting your hands on it and playing with it is so, so helpful. And the other thing is to take the pressure off yourself, because you can't stay on top of every little change. We've had some really cool new feature updates. You don't need to know that. You just need to know my phone number, right? You just need to know the phone numbers of the companies, and you let them stay on top of the technology for you. Just, have them all in your phone, have them on speed dial. So in terms of our devices, our focus is flexibility, because we work with people who are very complex. We need it to be able to be flexible so that what they are using in year 1 can also work in year 2 and year 3, because very often we have people who have progressive diseases. So people may be gaining or losing physical, motor, or cognitive skills. They may be gaining or losing any number of access options. So we have a real focus on it being able to work as they change. And that might be just throughout the day. It may be over the course of 5 years that they have their device, but it may be from the morning to the afternoon for some of our folks. So our devices, the ones that we're most known for, we have touchscreen devices, but the ones we're most known for have 3 access methods. So they can be used like a traditional, more old school eye gaze device. And Renee, I'm going to go ahead and do this just because we talked earlier. There's such a broad range of exposure to AAC. So I'm going to break it down like this, that with an eye gaze device, if you were comparing it to mouse use, your eyes would be what moves the cursor around, and your click would happen with a dwell or a blink, so that you stare for a certain amount of time and it activates, or you blink for a certain amount of time and it activates. And you can set how long that is. What can be very challenging about that, especially if you use it yourself, and don't just use it to go, oh, I activated something, use it to have a conversation. No matter what system we're talking about, even if it's low tech, use it to have a conversation. Very important. But you'll find that getting this sweet spot so that you aren't dwelling so long that your eyes are very fatigued, but it's not so short that you're accidentally activating things you don't mean to. For me, it led to like this little low-grade anxiety. I'm like, not that, so, not what I want. So a lot of folks, most of our clients are using what we would call trilogy access, where our eyes are still performing the cursor mode, right? They're still what's highlighting things on the screen. But when we get to what we want, we activate a switch. When you do that, when you add a switch in, it just gives you so much control, because it's essentially like a variable dwell speed. Because if I get on something in 1/10 of a second, I can activate in 1/10 of a second. I don't have to wait for the countdown of that dwell. But if I need 5 or 6 seconds to look around the screen, I can take all the time in the world, because nothing's going to happen until I intentionally activate my switch. Now, where the problem lies is that most people who need eye gaze, for a lot of reasons, can't consistently activate a traditional switch. And that's another place where it's amazing to me how many options are out there. I mean, we have sip and puffs, we have, all the range of jelly beans and Big Macs and all of that, and proximity switches and ultralights. There's so many great switches out there, but they don't work for a lot of our clients, either because our clients sometimes have no obvious visible movement at all,
Right.
or they can't consistently direct their movement to a certain location. And I have a little person who was just one of my very favorite little humans in North Carolina that I worked with when I was on the assistive technology team there, and just brilliant little guy. And he knew exactly what to do. And he could kind of do this movement. We had a gooseneck mount attached to his wheelchair, and we had carved out this foam piece, your OTs are your MacGyvers, and she found it in her garage. We had this thing that helped kind of try to direct his arm so that it could lay comfortably in there and not go too far to the side. So we had him kind of ensconced to help his direction be only up And he could do it for about 45 minutes. Then we'd have to move the gooseneck down just a little bit, move it down just a little bit. So that is often the case where they may be able to activate a traditional switch, but only for a limited period of time. Or we got that all set up and it was perfect. And then guess what? He went into his stander and it was all, that whole configuration is back on his wheelchair. So that is often the case. If you need eye gaze, you're probably complex like that. So that's where things are really different, because our switch is the neuro node, which is fun to say. You're right. Flows off the tongue.
It's also fun to play with if you guys get the chance to have a demo.
That is the absolute truth, because that's how I first encountered it. I was just doing AAC consultation work, and I was like, well, let me see what this is. And it is, and I will tell you, I've worked for Control Bionics now for 4.5 years, and I'm still blown away. Every day, I just think, this is so cool. I can't believe people are able to develop something this brilliant. So the little neuro node is very tiny. It's wearable. That's like a really key piece, because essentially it's mounted on you. Like, you're the mount. You don't have anything. So it's on you. If you go from your wheelchair to your stander, it goes with you because it's on you. And it's got 2 modes too. So here's a good place for me to say, Renee, what I think is most amazing about these systems is what's completely overwhelming when you first encounter them is that for any one thing you need to be able to do, you can do 4 or 5 different ways to approach that. So you can use our switch in an EMG mode or in a spatial mode. In EMG, so that's the one that I think feels very impressive for people, is that you often can't necessarily see our clients doing any movement at all. So maybe if you have spinal muscular atrophy or ALS, in those situations, when they attempt to make a movement, so in EMG mode, it is reading the electrical signals that your brain sends to your muscles when you attempt to move it. So if I ask, for instance, a client with ALS to try to lift their hand, they may or may not be able to do any visible movement to lift it, but as they attempt to lift it, their brain is still sending a signal, and that's what it's going to read. So I think early on, I was trying to explain what this was, and I would send links to videos of our clients using it, and then people would say, I don't understand what's happening. It's like the computer's working itself. And I thought, oh, right. It's hard to show because often you can't really see the movement, which I do need to say this. Right in my own hometown of Knoxville, there is someone, and there's a few people who claim that you can use it with your mind, and you cannot use the neuro node with your mind. I just want to be right up front about that, because that's just going to set up expectations that we shouldn't have. If I attempt to make a movement, my hand actually moves. If my kiddo with spinal muscular atrophy attempts to make a movement, he's really trying. He's just not able to do it. So there is someone in my town who claims to be able to use it with her mind, which is amazing, but it's not a typical access, I would say, for 99.9% of the people. In EMG mode, we have a lot of people who are going to even use facial structures. So maybe eyebrows or a blink or a cheek muscle. I just got a veteran set up last week who did his wife called it a chin waggle. And I thought, a chin waggle? I don't know what that is. Well, you know what? When I saw what it was, it's a chin waggle. He just does this. And it's a brilliant, clean, wonderful EMG signal. So when we start talking about things like EMG, I think that scares people. And once again, I will point to who I am, not tech savvy, not just a plain old speech pathologist. It is truly far less complicated than a lot of the traditional mount situations I have tried to come up with to get a switch within firing range. So not that you can't get switches within firing range, but I would say there's no more difficulty to it than that. There's a learning curve, but what's beautiful about the technology is that the more advanced it gets behind the scenes, kind of the more simple the interface gets. And so those are things, that we help get those set up, right? We help figure out where the placement needs to be. And then getting that neuronode placed in the right place is not difficult at all. Then the other thing is we have spatial mode. So in spatial mode, it's got a sensor in the neuronode that's a lot like the accelerometer in your phone. So it knows how it's moving in space. So in that situation, that doesn't even have to touch the skin. That can be worn over the clothing. It can be worn over shoes. We have a lot of people who use a little toe tap, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. And so they can just wear it right around their shoe if they have them on. And we do have people who go back and forth between different placements and different, EMG versus spatial. One of the kind of fun things about it is that based on some evaluation centers who have our devices and we're evaluating clients, and they would get their neuronode all set for patient number 1 at 9:00. And then they would go on to their next patient and they had to change the settings. So they write down the settings. This is what our activation was for this client, and this is what our activation was for this one. So they put something in called profiles that lets the clinics then say, oh, this is Mr. Baker, this is Mr. Smith. And they just choose the patient's name and it automatically sets it to the profile for that person. Well, my brilliant families and users said, you know what? Some days I want to use my eyebrows. Some days I want to use a cheek. Some days I want to use a chin waggle. And we can just set up profiles for different body parts. And that is no small thing, because when you have a complex body, it is not the same. It's not the same from day to day. It's not even necessarily the same from morning to afternoon. And when you have a body that has made you give up so much control, and you can say, I want it on my eyebrow. I want it on my cheek. They get to pick where it goes. It makes a big difference to have that level of control and be able to tell people which part of their body is feeling okay today in this moment. So
yeah,
really
that's
helpful.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So as long as you have a movement that you can control, then we have a way to reach it. We can do that with electrodes. We've got even EOG. So that's for more extreme cases, but I've had 2 clients myself. EOG is extraocular myography. So it's around your eyes. So for instance, I had a client who had a paragliding accident in the 90s. He had only lateral movement of his right eye. It's the only movement he had in his body. And so we were able to place electrodes just around his eye and put the neuronode in EOG mode. And he was able to use that with scanning to access the device. So it's crazy. It's amazing. I'm absolutely blown away by it.
Yeah, that is crazy. And I think I shared this with you when I first met you, is when I was a brand new SLP doing my clinical fellowship, my CF supervisor, well, it's mentor now, but was supervisor back then. We had a patient that had a pretty significant moving into brainstem stroke, and he was basically, for all intents and purposes at the time, paralyzed. I mean, really, he had toe movement. And so whenever you talked about the EMG stuff, we did a basic old school switch because toe movement was the only thing he had, and he could tap. I don't even remember at this point the company that we used, but whatever, we had the OT came in and helped us, but we basically he had Prevalon boots, and we were able to put some different type of material underneath his heel so that he wouldn't have everything covered on his foot for, pressure relief and reducing the risk of pressure ulcers. So he wouldn't have that barrier of the Prevalon thickness to access that toe tap. And he was able to just basically it was the littlest movement, but it was this ginormous switch. So that would have been a game changer for him.
But I love, though, Renee, that you thought outside the box like that. See, I love stories like that, because I think
it wasn't me, it was my CF supervisor.
But how lucky to have a CF supervisor that could do that, because I don't think that would be the case everywhere. I love that. And you're right, though. I think that's the thing, is that this does open a door for people who don't have another way in. And it's, once you've got that movement, that the neuronode can capture that movement, that can be turned into so many things, right? It can be your activation with eye gaze. It also can be an activation with scanning, because there are people for whom eye gaze does not work at all, or maybe they're blind, maybe they have visual impairments, and that's just not going to be functional. So once you've got that movement, you can do so much. And then there's a whole other realm that we probably could do a whole other talk about. This is, once we've got your movement, that little one neuronode signal can be parlayed into a lot of things. So like, we can have it can run a pet feeder. That is my favorite. That's actually my favorite. It's not the most impressive, but it is my all-time favorite, because so many of my people were used to being such doers for other people, and now they're in a situation where they are being caretaken of. I'm really sure that's not correct grammar. You get the gist. It's a Monday night. But to be able to give their dog a treat or their cat a treat is such a big deal. It also can do the OB feeding robot, which is really cool. So gaining some independence back. And then very exciting. So in one of the states that I cover, North Carolina, they have adaptive gaming expos all around the state. And our brilliant Chief Technology Officer, James Shorey, is one of my favorite people. And he has come up with a way to take the adaptive gaming controller, which is amazing if you've seen it, but it is not adapted enough for most of the people we serve. It's still not accessible for them. So he's found a way to turn that neuronode signal into up to 8 different actions within an Xbox game so that people can do gaming. And it's crazy. I mean, I'm not a gamer. I'm like Pac-Man. Right? I can't play any impressive games. And I am a speech pathologist. So to me, communication, connection, that is everything. There's a lot to be said about that. The fact that I can call my friend and talk to her and just feel better after 10 minutes of talk, that's a big deal. So communication and connection is everything. But after going to these adaptive gaming conferences, and really the only game I can really play is Hegel the Farting Unicorn game. It is fun. You're just blasting balls out of the sky. And doing it with the neuronode, and I got so absorbed in it, and the people who were around were interested in it. And the thing that I noticed was very quickly, what we were doing had nothing to do with the technology. That's not what anybody was focusing on. And that's the gold standard in the world of AT, where the technology is invisible to the task. And I mean, it became invisible almost right away. Because you're just engaged in the game, people are talking about the game, that, there's this extra cool technology happening, but that was not the focus. And so I've had to admit that gaming really is a good use of our time, because that's like legitimate connection. And I think that's what we're going for. I mean, the technology is amazing, but it should just not be visible. That's not the point. The point is that connection with people. It does give a way in for people who don't have another way to connect, which is why I am an AAC evangelist. It's a big deal. And I would love for us to talk about this sometime too, because the young man who did the waggle, Jen Waggle, we were talking about kind of personalizing his grid sets, and that is key. There is not a one size fits all. There's some clear parameters and features that everyone needs. But the people who are happiest and use their devices the most are the ones where you really have taken the time to personalize it. So I'm just going to throw that out there. It would be so nice if it was more of a plug and play, but not always. I mean, if you have a QWERTY keyboard and you've had the luxury of literacy, yes. But for other people, it's not so much. But as we were talking about personalizing things for him, and she said, he's not a chatty guy. He was never a chatty guy. He doesn't love face-to-face interaction. He's an introvert. He talks to his birds, and his birds talk back to him. And that was most important. And I think that's one of those things you brought up earlier, really talking to the family is knowing as you go in, what do you even want to do? We're not going to make a non-introverted person an extrovert. But, sometimes we put these demands on them for communication, and you may think, oh, I don't know that this is going to work for him, this system, but are we sure that we're paying attention to who that person really is in the moment and letting him show himself through the technology and not, I think we can lose sight sometimes. So this whole idea of a system that is not taxing, it's not fatiguing, and it can very quickly become invisible to your task is important. And I don't want to overstate that. I shouldn't say very quickly. There's a learning curve for learning to use a communication device. And if you think that's not true, take your smart brain with all its education and ability to spell and know how to put words together and how to navigate things and try using alternative access. It's an eye-opener. It really is.
Well, and I think that's a good point in that, one, it's shared decision making, which we all, should be taking part in, and two, functional. I've always been a huge proponent of functional, even when that wasn't a buzzword, and even when it wasn't. As like a student, I had really great clinical placements, and I'm so grateful for that, and so fortunate that I had the people that I worked with who allowed me to keep on with that. Okay, think outside the box, be more functional, meet them where they're at. And so I've always done that. And I said recently to a student of mine that way back in the early days when, we may not have had all the treatment materials accessible that some places have now, I could take a newspaper and do therapy, language therapy, and cognitive therapy and figure out how to make it work. Because you had to think outside the box a lot more when it came to those kinds of things. And so I think when we think about our clients and our patients and trying to figure out how does a trial work and how do they try these devices and who pays for all that. So I think that's a good kind of place to go now.
Speaking of functional, in the land of rainbows and unicorns that I want to live in, I would just be giving them to anybody who needed them. If ever I want all the money in the world, that is what would happen, because I hate that families have to deal with insurance when they're already dealing with so much. But the devices are fundable through insurance. We have them funded through private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid plans in all of the states. And in fact, in Japan and Australia and the UK, we're in a lot of places now. So they are all fundable through insurance. That's a great question. Trials, we do free trials. That is, absolutely call us. If you want to get your hands on, even, I have school speech pathologists who say, hey, can we just get one out and try it with several different kids? Definitely. We can ship them out to you. I always come out when the device comes and help you get set up and just kind of walk through everything. And then, because if you're like me, it'll all make perfect sense. And then 2 hours later, you go, what did she say? And that is okay, because we have got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's a person who will answer the phone and get somebody to help you. We have got all kinds of video resources, but absolutely call us for trials. It's free trial. We just send that out. There's a little bit of paperwork, especially for kids, because different insurance plans have different trial requirements. So, we always want to check and see what their insurance company would request.
Right.
And try it. Here in the South, this is one of the things, just try it. And it doesn't, if I am a speech pathologist, I'm an AAC evangelist, I want you to try it. And then if what you find is a different device is a better fit, then that was great information. Finding out what doesn't work is as valuable as finding out what does work. And a trial is a great way to do that. I also do, if you're just a team of therapists and you say, hey, I want to play, I do AAC play dates with more than happy to come out and bring all of our devices and let people just play with them and see what it's like for themselves. We do lunch and learns. We can even do lunch and learns for ASHA credit at this point. So, there's a lot of ways to get your hands on a device and try it with yourself, try it with your clients. So you can just call right on the website. You can do an online inquiry, or you can just call your consultant that's in your region, and we will happily get one out to you. That's important for people to be able to get their hands on.
One thing I recently learned, and this was from someone in our state who was a big influence on like early policy and trying to get funding and stuff like that, was that there are some, so say it's an adult and they are not necessarily a workman's comp, it could be a workman's comp case, but it could be something that the person needs to access communication in order to be able to continue on in their job, that some corporations also offer funding. And that was something that I wasn't aware of beyond just the
know that either, Renee.
Yeah. So it was actually the first person that my very first podcast that I hosted, Linda Meyer, she said that there are some funding sources through private companies. When it's an employee, there's some grants through some state organizations too. So some of the organizations that are more like support organizations, like, and I'm not this isn't a quote like don't go bombard the Alzheimer's Association, because I'm using it as an example. I don't know that that's the right person, but those types of, like the MS Coalition, those types of organizations, I'm not saying that that actual organization provides funding, but those types of supportive organizations who raise funds and do a lot of education and community awareness often will have grants or grant funding for AAC. And again, not those two particular entities. It's just that's an example of those community groups and supportive groups who do that. And that was something I had no clue, because, as an SLP, we just tend to go through whoever's the company who's providing the success in that device trial. And they usually will have a funding person who helps navigate insurance and helps us with the documentation as SLPs and has that part taken care of. But yeah, there's funding sources out there that I think not everyone is aware of. And that was kind of my whole point.
Well, I know that's a really good point, though, because I think sometimes people wonder about, how am I going to do this if I don't have insurance? And you're right. I know that we've had a few clients who actually crowdfunded their devices, had fundraisers, and I didn't know about the corporations, but there are some charitable organizations like Chive is one that I know of, CHIVE. And you're right. I think that's a great idea to just do a check. And sometimes your funding team will know other answers too. So if you've found a device that works well for a client and they don't have an insurance plan that will cover it, see if their funding team knows of any resources like that. Our funding manager can really throw out some interesting backups sometimes when needed.
So we do have a question in the chat box. So when someone has an AAC device and uses NeuroNode to access, what is the device they generally have? Is it like a Dynavox or an iPad?
Oh, thank you for that. That's a great question that I should have been clearer about. So again, in the world of rainbows and unicorns, they would all play nicely together. But the NeuroNode itself is actually part of the Trilogy system. So it is an eye gaze device. We offer two different types of eye gaze cameras. Again, we're trying to be very flexible, recognizing that eye gaze cameras are based on algorithms. So what works really well for client A may not work well at all for client B. So being able to have a few choices. So we have two different eye gaze devices. They're attached to the base of our device is a Windows Surface Pro 9 Plus. And it is a whole system. So it's funded. It costs about the same as a traditional eye gaze device, but it's just got those additional methods, those additional access methods. So you would have the NeuroNode, the eye gaze camera, and the computer itself comes as one thing. The NeuroNode also interacts with or works on an iPad. I give you this big caveat. We do have an iOS system with eye gaze. And I'm going to tell you, I am a Luddite, Renee. I am right now speaking as Jill Adlin, clinical speech pathologist, and Luddite, not as a control bionics person, because we do offer those devices. As an SLP, I just feel like, gosh, it's early. It's early. Apple has not played in this alternative access world as long as the rest of the devices have. And I think it's going to be amazing. I just think it feels very early. So to me, it's always like, you want to be a beta tester? And I do. I have some clients who are very tech savvy. They're interested. They're early adopters. They want to be in on the latest and greatest. I would happily give them one. But when I talk about an iPad and iOS system, this interfaces, there's a free controller app that you can get on an iPad. So if you are using scanning, that's been around for a long time. So the caveat I would tell you is it's just a switch. So there's nothing about this that's going to change your experience of using a scanning access of an iPad. So if you've spent any time doing that, whether with the radar or a group item scan, you know that if you're doing it within an app where the developer thought about alternative access, it's great. If you're doing it outside of an app that really was thinking about scanning access, it can kind of be a nightmare. And again, is information coming to you from trying to use it myself to make things happen as pretending that I didn't have any other function. That can be really difficult on an iPad. It's getting better. It's getting better. And it's actually one of the areas I'm most excited to watch and see what's coming, because I think it's going to be amazing. There are some things about it that I already love. I'm just definitely a late adopter. There are other younger people in my company who are not late adopters. So that's a great question.
Well, so I think you've kind of touched on this, is strategies for clinicians and medically complex patients when they're looking at access. I think you've talked about that for the most part. I think more so for the medically complex clients, it might be a good place to kind of share what you were telling me earlier about some of your folks you're working with right now who kind of supersede you when you go back to do their follow-up visit.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, Renee and I were talking about I have a client who lives very close to her. And of course, it's not very hard to exceed me, Renee, in terms of tech skill. But one of my clients who has ALS, she has a master's in computer science and was actually an accountant for the IRS. She is an incredibly sharp lady. And she was very careful in her decision about which device she wanted and really vetted us thoroughly. And she initially wreaked havoc because she was so tech savvy that she ran her computers in ways that most of us would not. Most of us would have no idea how to go in behind the scenes and do these things that she was doing. And unfortunately, she kept disrupting things because she was back making changes on her computer where on her old laptop, it was a reasonable thing for her to do. But on our device, it actually would interfere with how the eye gaze camera was able to function or interfere with how the neuronode was able to function. And so I just would always have to bypass her straight on up to our tech support team because she worked in a part of the computer I didn't understand. And I didn't tell you this, Renee, but the last chain, this has been a few years ago now, she's using her device and everything's great. But the last subject line said, if you fix it one more time, I promise to quit tinkering. So she and our tech support had gotten to be quite close. So she's beloved by all of us, and she put us through our paces. So she's really helped me learn the extreme details of what you can do with alternative access.
Well, I think that's such a good point because there's a misnomer, or sometimes, at least I feel like there is, that a lot of AAC users, just like with our patients with aphasia, there's a lot of times when people think that their cognition is impaired and that because they're not able to functionally verbally communicate, that they have a cognitive impairment that would prevent them from having that ability to customize their device or have a say in customizing their device.
That is huge. And one of my favorites in Grid 3, we are app agnostic too, but we are partnered with Smartbox, and Grid 3 is generally what people choose. And I'm a huge fan of it. But one of my very favorite features within Alpha Core and Grid 3 are these communication tips. And it's pre-programmed right in there. It says, my hearing and thinking are fine. Please speak normally to me. I love that. I love people regaining the control and saying, yes, I'm not communicating this way, but you need to engage with me, not my spouse. And I have definitely, many of my clients are much brighter in so many ways, and I am lucky to learn from them on a daily basis. And Kate is definitely a standout.
So when you say Alpha Core, you're talking about core vocabulary.
So Alpha Core is
just for people who aren't familiar.
Yeah, Alpha Core is one of the many grid sets offered within Grid 3. Grid 3 is amazingly robust. It's a perfect thing for us because, again, flexibility. I think I mentioned earlier, I have an almost 3-year-old, and she is happily and successfully using Grid 3, as is a 62-year-old graphic designer. So it really can run the gamut, and it can change with you as you change.
So we did have a follow-up question, and I answered it, but I want to make sure that I answered it correctly. The question was, is the Windows Surface Pro Plus a computer or like an iPad? And so what I said was, Windows Surface Pro is another handheld tablet style device. The difference is Windows operating system versus iPad with the Apple operating system.
Yeah, that is very true. And it's just in terms of, the PC realm has been doing alternative access for a really long time. So there's a lot of bells and whistles that are already there and worked out and work beautifully. So I'm a fan.
Yeah. Any other clients you want to mention that you feel like are standouts, and maybe just in the adult world? Because I know when you and I attended so Jill was a presenter at the AAC Palooza at one of the universities that I teach at in Virginia. And I attended that, and that's the demo and everything. The course that you did, you had some pretty good case studies in there. And so we have just a couple of minutes if you can run through like just a medically complex person in a short time frame.
Of course, we already talked about Rex, who had been wonderful, and he had used actually a switch that he used with an eye blink, but even that had started to be too fatiguing for him, and it was not functioning as consistently as he would want. And he had used Morse code in the past. So that's a whole other topic that I delved into, that I didn't realize that if you have a literate user, that's actually a really speedy option. I did not know. But so he was a great case of using EOG placement to be able to use scanning. So he would do a side look to activate the scan. It would highlight the things that were on the screen and got to what he wanted. He would activate again. I want to tell you real quickly about Emily. Emily is an adult with cerebral palsy, and Renee, we didn't even get into that realm. But before I came to work for Control Bionics, CP was the thing that vexed me more than anything. And now I work with people with spinal cord injury, spinal muscular atrophy, ALS. CP is still the hardest. It is still the hardest because there's so little control. The smarter they are, the worse their bodies fight them, it feels like. I could talk to you for an hour about all the cool things that are now a part of the NeuroNode application that are because of my clients with CP. It's very much a feedback loop for us. So as people are using things and we see something that's hard, we can take that to our chief technology officer and he can put things in. So I'm going to tell you, because I said that, I'm going to tell you about Drake very quickly. He was a very favorite kiddo. He was 16 when he finally was able to really access a device. So he was a scanner, and he wore his NeuroNode on his elbow, and he could move his elbow. He could never move it in the same direction, but he didn't have to because all it was capturing with his backward movement. And he would start the scan. It would get to what he wanted. He would activate it. And when it did what he wanted it to do, he would have a spastic reaction. And what that did is it caused it to start scanning again, so that I wanted to throw the device through the window. It was enraging because he would get where he wanted, and then his body reaction that he couldn't stop would cause it to start to scan again. So I told James about this, and 24 hours later, he had come up with something called the upper limit line. So we use a graph on the neuronode so that we can see the client's movement, and we can customize what the neuronode reads as its signal. And so it has its activation line. So every time Drake would do his movement, his little line on the graph would go up and hit the activation line. When he would spasm, he would have a giant spike on the graph. So James put in a way that if there was a big spike, the computer now says, oh, that wasn't intentional. I'm going to ignore that. So if it has a big movement, it just doesn't read that. So that's a great example of a complex body that had a specific issue that now that feature is in place and being used by lots of people for lots of different reasons. And I think that's what's key for us, is that we do encounter very challenging situations, either in terms of how people are using their computer or how their bodies respond once they're there. So, we're running the gamut there because we have Kate, who is still using Excel, using eye gaze and the switch and doing Excel documents, and Drake, who really was still learning language and was for the first time telling people things and telling people what he wanted, and having a body that was still complicated. And we were able to kind of make some tweaks and adjustments to help it be something that still worked for him. And I have an amazing picture that I'll send you that is of Drake and his amazing speech pathologist. So, and I'm noticing the time, so I'm trying to rein my discussion.
Yeah, no,
you're talking about patients. Exactly, I could talk forever.
Yeah, me too. But I just thank you, Jill, so much for joining us tonight. It's always good to have a perspective that is varied, and you bring a lot with what you say is not your technology brain, but you bring a lot with your patient stories and your functional stories of access and things like that. So I appreciate that so much. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. Thank you for joining us at today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe.